Both the previous military dictatorship and the current civilian government have blacked out or banned news channels when they've covered politically sensitive events or taken an anti-establishment stance. For their part, the courts too carefully control how the media reports on judicial activities by threatening journalists with contempt of court proceedings. In this context, journalists have to pick their targets extremely carefully. Unable to criticize the military or militants, they often risk using the civilian government and political class, as well as external actors such as the US and India, as their preferred punching bags. I'll get to that in a little bit. These constraints are then further complicated by the fact that the media industry was liberalized for very strategic reasons, to counter what Pakistan termed Indian media propaganda, and to push back against what was perceived domestically as a pro-India, anti-Pakistan cultural assault by satellite television through the 1990s. The decision to liberalize the media was taken in the late 1990s, when Pakistan had tested its nuclear weapons. The Indian Airlines flight from Kathmandu had been hijacked, for those of you who remember, and the Kargil conflict took place. After all these incidents, Indian news channels broadcasting across Pakistan on satellite TV channels took an extremely pro-India, pro-war, and anti-Pakistan line. In particular, the Kargil conflict was depicted as a transgression and a failure of the Pakistan army, when they wanted to frame it as a strategic victory. After that backlash, it was decided to liberalize the Pakistani media to provide alternative local outlets for audiences, but also to project the Pakistani point of view in a global media market as well as to the Pakistani diaspora. The legacy of this mandate is evident today in political talk shows with strong anti-India programming sponsored by the intelligence agencies, and in the planting of fake news stories such as the recent falsified WikiLeaks about India. We'll talk more about that in the Q&A. The more troubling legacy of this, of course, is the expectation amongst the Pakistani establishment that the independent media will always champion the national interest, quote-unquote, as defined by the Pakistan army. Given this schizophrenic environment, in which media is simultaneously unprecedentedly free and yet fettered, we are confronted with two questions. Can the media use its agenda-setting and news-making capacity to be a force to mobilize civil society and pressurize Pakistan's political institutions into implementing reform? Or will it succumb to these various constraints and become implicated in and co-opted by the current political infrastructure and continue to reinforce political discourse as determined by the establishment, but with the guise of independence? To get at these questions, let's briefly consider how the media industry covers certain topical issues. I'll begin with the media's coverage of domestic terrorism. As most of you in this room know, in the past 4 years, over 30,000 Pakistanis have been killed in terrorist attacks, sectarian attacks, and army operations against militants. The independent media's coverage of this extremist violence has been strongly criticized by politicians, liberals, human rights organizations, and international actors such as the US government. They accuse the media of fostering sympathy for the militants and spurring terrorism by providing excessive coverage of attacks. In other words, they are accused of helping the militants in their mission to terrorize the public by amplifying the effect of the attacks. The media is also accused of fostering a culture of denial about the source of the attacks and the violence and the reason behind them, privileging conspiracy theory over fact. One of the most common refrains that has been heard on the independent media is the idea that Muslims couldn't possibly be carrying out these terrorist attacks. The media stance on terrorism was so problematic and yet influential that the Pakistan Army had to exert great pressure on independent outlets in April 2009 to seek their support for military operations against militants in the Swat Valley. The Chief of Army Staff personally appealed to media owners and senior journalists not to focus their coverage on that military operation on civilian casualties and collateral damage, which had made previous operations extremely unpopular. They also encouraged the media to show a video captured on mobile phone of a woman being flogged by the militants. Many of you will remember that fairly iconic clip, and I can again talk more about that in the question and answer. The army also pressed the media not to extensively report on Taliban or other militant views in the course of that operation. The media's decision to comply and their change in coverage on this issue was crucial in generating public support for the Army's action against militancy. But ideological compliance is not so easily secured. A few months ago, many of you will remember, the media showed its right-wing propensities in the run-up to and wake of the murder of the Punjab governor, Salman Taseer. He was shot by his own bodyguard for supporting an amendment to Pakistan's controversial blasphemy law. Many argued that the media was implicated in his murder and in the reaction of his murder, since many Pakistanis actually supported the assassin's actions and refused to condemn Salman Taseer's killing. The argument is that the channels gave endless airtime to radicalized clerics who called for the murder of a Christian woman and accused Salman Taseer of committing blasphemy. One popular talk show host, Meher Bukhari, also implied in an interview with the governor shortly before his death that he did not care about protecting the Prophet's name from abuse. No doubt the media has had its greatest impact on Pakistani society by giving national airtime to radical voices that would otherwise have remained confined to some radical mosques and extremist publications or websites. And through this process, fringe extremist views have been incorporated into national discourse. But before we write off the media as this rabid right-wing space, there are a few ground realities that I think we should keep in mind. I'm going to try and briefly list them here. The first point is that the culture of denial about the sources and reasons for terrorism in Pakistan has not originated with the media. Rather, it echoes the establishment's viewpoint. Throughout 2008 and 2009, Pakistan's interior minister was known to blame terrorist attacks on foreign actors and external agents. The media was, of course, required to report on his statements and then base their commentary on them. There's another ground fact, good or bad, that journalists enjoy getting scoops, which is what interviews with militant leaders are. Of course, once they get that kind of access to militant organizations, media professionals live in fear of retaliatory attacks by militants and are less willing to report on these groups in a negative light. The Pakistan Army has also ensured that journalists don't have access to the tribal areas in many parts of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. This information vacuum prevents investigative journalism that may throw out helpful counter-narratives to the conspiracy theories that have to take the place of fact in most news reports and analysis. There are also serious shortcomings in the journalistic capacity of most media outlets. To understand what I mean by that, let's briefly return to the coverage of the Red Mosque standoff. That was the first incident in which radicalized clerics and militants enjoyed extensive airtime on privately owned television channels. At that point, the media's attempt to present the viewpoints of the militants was actually a clumsy attempt at objectivity. With no training on how to cover an urban conflict in which one group is violating government writ, the media fumbled through the best it could in an effort to cover all sides of the story. Of course, once the Red Mosque conflict concluded, public opinion sided with the militants, who were seen as martyrs and unnecessary victims of a brutal army assault. Unfortunately, the lesson the media learned from that incident was that extremists are far better at getting TV ratings than government officials. That deference to market forces is often overlooked when discussing Pakistan's media and the choices that it makes. As an aside, however, I'd like to point out that the market is not only a negative influence on independent media. It is often the best antidote to flawed coverage, in fact. For example, when there was a public backlash against the excessively graphic way in which channels were covering the aftermath of terrorist attacks, 9 private TV channels adopted a completely voluntary code of conduct that then controlled the types of images that they were willing to broadcast. What this issue really gets us to is a question of causality. Does Pakistan's private media simply reflect public sentiment, or does it drive it on certain issues? This is something I'm happy to discuss further.